How does a lens make you feel? More specifically, how does a cinematographer use a lens to make you feel? From imposing wides to stylized close-ups, I'll be exploring the ways DOPs use lens techniques and technologies to drive the narrative, engage the viewer, and create visual wonders.
The thing about lens choice, it's sort of a psychological thing, and the effect you want to create for the audience. How do you want the audience to feel? What's their perspective on the image you're showing them?
One of the most important decisions when choosing a lens is which focal length you'll use for the scene. Focal length can be defined as the distance from the point of convergence in your lens to the camera sensor or film plane. It's usually measured in millimeters. Choice of focal length is important as it defines the magnification and field of view for a given lens, as well as altering characteristics as you progress through the focal range. A wide lens can give closer subjects more depth, accentuate camera movement, and introduce some distortion. A standard lens, like a 50mm, is often seen as one which closely replicates the human eye's field of view, therefore it is used for things such as close-ups, where we need it to feel more natural, whereas a telephoto lens will compress the focal planes, giving subjects a flatter look and providing a shallower depth of field. Cinematographers can sometimes have an affinity for certain focal lengths. Some go wide.
So very, very wide lenses. You know, the lenses we use are lenses that in a normal Hollywood movie they would use once. It relates them to the environment. It immerses the audience in this world.
And some, like Greg Fraser with Dune Part 2, go long. So as we know, focal length is an integral part of knowing which lens you'll use, but there is two ways focal length can be implemented, with a prime lens or with a zoom. A prime lens, which is a lens with a fixed focal length, can be considered the standard when it comes to filmmaking and what many cinematographers, like Roger Deakins, tend to gravitate towards.
I always like primes because I like the fact that it forces you to make a decision where you're going to put the camera and what lens are you going to put it on.
Prime lenses tend to have a higher optical quality due to the construction of primes being much simpler and the design more straightforward than that of zooms. They usually have a lower T-stop, the benefits of which we'll cover in a moment, and as we heard from Deakins, using primes adds a constraint. It forces you to think more critically about what focal length to use and where to put the camera, making the shots more purposeful. Zoom lenses, which allow you to vary the focal length, do, on the other hand, have a few benefits, first of which being the opportunity to use techniques which you're not able to do with prime lenses. One being the contra zoom, where the lens is zoomed whilst the camera is simultaneously being dollied in or out. This can be used to show a character is losing sense of reality or to create the sensation of vertigo. This, combined with the fact that it debuted on Hitchcock's film Vertigo, is why it can also be called the vertigo shot. And the second technique, the crash zoom, where the lens is quickly zoomed by way of zoom motor or focus lever. This effect is primarily used to punch in for close-ups, giving a stronger impact, to quickly zoom out from a close-up, revealing something to the audience, or of course, just for some dramatic flair.
Punch that shit!
While the zoom lens is a necessity for these shots, the type of zoom lens is something that also needs to be considered. There are two types of zoom lens, a varifocal, where as focal length changes, so does the subject's focus, and the parfocal, where subjects stay sharp across the focal range. So as there is a massive shift in focal length when performing these techniques, a parfocal lens is usually preferable as it ensures the subject stays in focus. As well as altering field of view, cinematographers may want to create depth in their shots and isolate their subjects. This is where a lens's aperture is important. Adjusting the aperture is done by opening and closing the lens's iris. This then alters the amount of light that passes onto the sensor and lets you control this key technique, depth of field. Depth of field is defined as the size of the area in your image where objects appear acceptably sharp, and is a powerful storytelling technique in filmmaking. A shallow depth of field, which leaves less of the image in focus, can be used to isolate your subject, which then in turn empowers filmmakers to visually tell stories from a more subjective viewpoint. Whereas a deep depth of field, where the frame is sharp from front to rear, can be used to highlight the character's surroundings and allow for different actions to take place over multiple planes. The shallowness of an image's depth of field is governed by a lens's T or f-stop. An f-stop is typically used on photography lenses and is calculated by dividing the lens's focal length by the diameter of the aperture. It does not, however, factor for light loss during transmission in the lens, whereas an aptly named transmission stop, or T-stop, does. This is why we primarily see T-stops on cinema lenses, because they represent the amount of light that funnels onto a lens's sensor much more accurately. So as we can see, lens choice is a vital part of the cinematography process. From vintage Soviet glass to ARRI signatures, every lens is unique and lives to serve its own purpose. A powerful tool that helps the DOP to shape the frame, convey the character's emotions, and alter the perspective of the audience. So there we have it. That's how a lens can make you feel.